Hey guys, Rollout here, and welcome back to Builder's Block. We've got some pretty crazy stuff this week. I think I'm starting to go a little bit stir-crazy, and it's giving me all sorts of weird ideas. I have to admit that I've been semi-consciously trying to avoid building any Transformers until I find time to showcase the couple that I already have in the pipeline. Hopefully I can get videos for Trowel done this week, but I still can't promise anything just yet. These are the kind of hangups that would keep me absent from this channel for months, but now that I've got Builder's Block as an outlet, I can keep you updated. One more thing, it seems like a good handful of you are interested in the Patreon switching over to a monthly structure, and now that I've got the show reliably running on a weekly basis, I think I feel better about going in that direction. Starting in April, I'll be making some changes, so keep an eye on the page, and I'll discuss them in more detail next week. Remember that you can also support the show by liking the video and sharing it with your friends. You know, from a comfortable social distance. Maybe wash your hands before posting the link on social media. Anyway, with all of that said and done, let's get started. At the beginning of the week, I built this kind of minecart-looking vehicle. To be honest, I didn't really know what this was going to be when I started building it. I began with this blue ladder grill element. I found that you could sort of wedge these clips into the bottom of it. I attached the bars, and it kind of looked like some sort of railroad vehicle to me, so I rolled with that. I didn't really know what to do with the top. I thought about maybe building plates on top of it so that it looked like it was full of sand or grain or something like that, but I couldn't really get it to work, so I just left it flat on top, and I think it looks fine. Here is kind of the internal mechanism of it. It looks very clean, and it's pretty well built, but ultimately it's nothing special. I do kind of wish I could have expounded on the idea and built it into something a little bit cooler. On the next day, I started getting experimental. I took out my big bin full of weird elements that I never know what to do with, and I started putting things together, and I ended up with this wild cloud cuckoo creature who looks a bit silly. You can see that he uses this basketball hoop net element as his main body, and then I was able to attach all of these facial features to it, and I think that's actually a really cool idea. Here it is from the back. He has kind of like a scorpion tail and like ribbon arms. It's absolute madness. Here it is from the bottom, and you can see kind of the cool connections that go into attaching all of his facial features to that net piece. Initially, I just started out with this connection here. I used this bucket and was able to attach this sort of flower piece using this rubber tire element. I thought that was really cool, but from there, I didn't know what to do with it. I thought about turning it into a missile or some kind of airship. And then I just sort of gave up and started slapping things onto it until I ended up with this creature, and the rest is history, I suppose. On the next day, I sort of did something similar, although with my big bag of foliage parts instead, and I ended up with this vine creature, this holly beast, I like to call it. He looks pretty cool. I really do like a lot of the ideas in this. He's got claws and teeth and kind of like tentacly vines. He looks really kind of scary from the right angles. You can see that he has a lot of these sort of rubbery vine moss elements throughout his body, which are kind of rubbery, and they have like a give to them that allows you to do some really interesting things. Like you can see the technique I used with his teeth and his eyes, as well as his body. The way the upper head attaches is very interesting. You can see the clip on the back of that central leaf piece kind of locks into one of the thorns surrounding his tail, and then the teeth sort of lock into each other. And it's actually really solid, even though there isn't any stud connection. So like I said, the flexibility of those foliage pieces allows you to do some really interesting things. Now, on the next day, I went with something a little bit more traditional, and believe it or not, to my knowledge, I have never built a simple Lego ball before. So, yeah, I just built this basic boulder. Now, you might be able to notice that it is missing a couple of plates. Intentional artistic license or a complete oversight that I did not realize until after I took these pictures. You decide. Either way, this is just a very basic snot technique ball. This is the kind of stuff that beginners build on, day one, week one. Like I said, I don't think I've ever built one of these before, so I did it. That's kind of a theme that runs through Builder's Block. Things that are commonplace techniques that I've just never tried before, and so I'm trying them out for the first time. Here are all 6 sides, and like I said, you'll notice that one of them is missing a couple of plates, which was just, absolutely intentional. I meant it to be like a kind of an irregular boulder surface. Just absolutely 100% on purpose. On the next day, I took one of these pulley elements and I wrapped a rubber band around it, and it kind of reminded me of an Oreo cookie. So I took that idea the distance and added a few more pieces, and here you go. Here is a Lego Oreo cookie, or maybe it's a Hydrox if you're that kind of person. You can see that I added a couple more rubber bands to it to give it a little bit more of that cream filling in the middle. But I think the proportions are spot on, if not for like a basic Oreo cookie, then a double stuff, obviously, with the 2 rubber bands. Of course, it is black and not kind of like the very dark brown that an actual Oreo is, but I think it works pretty well. And then, because I needed another picture, I did a little photo shoot with AntMan because it seems like something that Scott Lang would do. On the final day of the week, I decided to give y'all Bionicle fans another treat. It seemed like a lot of you enjoyed last week's episode, enjoyed my little Bionicle field trip, so we're dipping back into that for one more creation here. When I talked about my Larissa combiner model, if you listen carefully, you might have heard me say a Larissa Mach and not the Larissa Mach, or my version of Larissa, implying that there might be another. Now, I cannot take credit for this model. I did almost entirely base it off of somebody else's, but that combiner model is not the main Larissa in my collection. That goes to this creation. This is the Larissa that is up on my shelf at the moment. This is my favorite version of Larissa that I have seen. It was built by somebody on DeviantArt named 4450, although I think in other circles they go by Dan DeZill. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, but if you Google Larissa Mach, you will kind of find this version of the character pretty easily, and this is my favorite version of Larissa, like I said. Honestly, at this point, I have a hard time imagining the character any other way, and so instead of just trying to build my own, I decided to build their version. I did make a couple of modifications just to my liking, but again, I can't take any credit for the overall design. I think it looks really cool. I love the proportions. I love the parts usage. I think their building style is really, really awesome. I did switch around some of the colors. I made the feet blue instead of black just to kind of add more of that color to the rest of the body, especially since on the original model there was a little bit of blue on the right arm, and I decided to make the forearm a little bit more solid by keeping it one single color, just like the shins of the model, but there is a little bit of blue in the rest of the body. I made it so that the robot arm and kind of the chest harness was entirely light bluish gray. Originally, it had a little bit of silver in it, and to me, if it can't be entirely silver, I might as well make it entirely gray. Again, I like those blocky color schemes. I like to kind of simplify things in that regard. The original had like a red like light in the middle of the chest. That anti-stud you see in the midsection there was actually translucent red. I thought that was kind of weirdly placed, and so I made that gray and then added a heart light to the upper section there, just to kind of give that idea of a chest light, but to do it a little bit differently. I think that generally heart lights are kind of an overplayed thing, and a lot of times I think they look really tacky and forced. I really don't like the way a heart light looks if you use a stud, because any time that a set incidentally has a heart light, it's just a pinhole or an axle sticking through, like on the Metru. It's a little bit more subtle than an anti-stud, and so I kind of tried to evoke that with that little blue pin there. You might have noticed that my Helrix Mach that I showed in the last episode also had a more subtle detail like that. Here it is from the back. Again, I just really love the proportions of this. I did change the neck so that it is a little bit longer. I also changed the eye elements. Originally, they used jewels, and those look okay, but these are, established Bionicle elements, these Baraki eyes here, so I think they just kind of fit with the aesthetic a little bit better. Initially, there was like a Hordika neck that attached the head, and it added some unnecessary gray to the body, and I used kind of a flick fire missile piece and a ball joint to make that black, to make that color scheme a little bit more solid. Here she is, along with my Medici Mach that you saw in the last episode as well. You can see that she is Toa height, which is how I feel she should be. She also fits very well next to things like the Shadowed One, things like Hakan, or any of the other Paraka and Dark Hunters. She's just got a really nice scale. She's got plenty of articulation. Like I said, I just absolutely love this Mach. With that out of the way, I do want to mention one more little thing about Nadiki, because it was obscured in the last video, in the picture that I chose to display him in. I do want to talk about his air scythe weapon, because I didn't in the last video. You can see that it has a hinge in the middle. It allows for kind of a very interesting connection, but I also think it's an interesting feature, because there actually is a historical weapon called a war scythe, where farmers would modify their farm equipment, modify their scythe tools so that the blade stood upright, kind of like a spear, so that it was easier to attack with the bottom edge of the blade. And so I've actually added that feature to Nadiki's Toa tool, to his scythe weapon, so that it can either be like the traditional farm tool with the blade on the bottom, or it can kind of hinge upward and be used more like a weapon. Again, this hinge was obscured in the last video, so I didn't really talk about it, but now that you can see it clearly here, I thought that it was worth mentioning. I might just have to go ahead and build a new Transformer soon, otherwise I'll lose my mind and go creatively bankrupt. I don't like being so far behind on showcases, but I guess having plenty of content planned in advance isn't necessarily a bad thing. It's better than having nothing at all. Special thanks to all of my supporters on Patreon, especially my Resilient Leader class patrons, Cruciferous Belligerents, Toa Ventron, and Valraven. Once again, look forward to the changes coming in April, and until then, this has been Rollout, signing off.